Hi, this is Carson Block with Zer0es TV, and thrilled to be interviewing Kyle Bass. Kyle and I have gotten to know each other the past couple of years, mostly talking about China, but I'm really impressed by Kyle's eclectic investing style, especially when it comes to short selling. And I'm thrilled to have you here, Kyle. So thank you for joining us.
Well, Carson, it's an honor to be with you. You are one of the greats, and as you know, there aren't that many in the short selling business.
It's kind of easy to be well regarded since nobody does this, but yeah, thank you. Reading about your background, it's really interesting because there was that whole thing with Michael Lewis's book about equities in Dallas, and made it sound like, at least at Solomon, that was sort of a career death sentence. But you started out your career on the sell side in Dallas, and it seems like that gave you a lot of intellectual freedom to really be all over the capital structure and doing different strategies. Is that an accurate read as to how you the foundations of your career and what led you to where you are today?
Yeah, it is, Carson, and in engaging in the financial markets in the manner in which, let's say, you and I look at things. Back then, if you remember Bear Stearns, where I was a senior managing director and covering and working with event-driven special sit funds. Bear Stearns had one of the world's best risk arb groups. We had a great spin-off and restructuring group, and those were you would think in ways that were different than just looking at relative PEs and growth versus value and all the things that, let's say, traditional portfolio managers do. You kind of get into a little bit more of the Wild West, in bankruptcy and in spin-offs, and then invariably you end up getting involved in understanding how frauds operate and how people take advantage of others in the markets.
What were some of the earlier situations that you looked at?
So my very first one was in let me tell you when this was, 1992, 93. If you remember, we had the fall of the Berlin Wall in '89, and we had the reunification of West Germany and East Germany, and there were some publicly listed securities in a shipping company that was an old East German shipbuilder. It was called Bremer Vulkan, and I was working with II's #1 shipping analyst, and we went to go have a look at this company and really dig into the financials, and we figured out that the executives were buying cars and houses and boats with the money, and it was never really going to build these ships in East Germany. And it was the worst possible thing that could have happened, Carson. This was back when there actually still were D-marks, so many of the people watching this video won't remember when that happened. But it went from 100 D-marks to 80 to 60 to 40, and I was in Australia, and I opened up the Financial Times in Australia in 1994, my first trip to Australia, and it was literally the German authorities closing the gates of Bremer Vulkan and locking them up, and realizing that they were filing bankruptcy and it was a fraud. It never went up. It never had a short squeeze, and it went straight to zero. Again, as you and I both know, that's akin to kind of going to Las Vegas and winning big the first time and thinking it's easy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the points that I'm fond of making is that if you're shorting frauds, it's really tough to do that if you don't have a way of getting the information out there. Back in the 90s, and I'd say even before the financial crisis, there was much more of a financial investigative media out there that short sellers could get these stories to. But I mean, since then, with all the newsroom cuts and really the shortening of the human attention span into an appetite just for sound bites, it's pretty tough to do that.
China has a closed capital account, and so they purport to be 15% of global GDP, and yet 1.5% of their currency transactions settle in their own currency. And so it's important to note that China has an insatiable and desperate need for, the way you think about it is anything that can really be spent, dollars, euros, yen, or pounds. No one trusts the RMB, no one trusts the Chinese government. And so you must have some sort of Western currency if you're going to enter into contractual relationships with the Chinese government. And so most everything that they settle in is dollars. And so, again, our view is that is their Achilles heel, and that is where you're going to see the United States focus going forward.
Having had that view, I think before this year, has COVID altered or solidified your view, I should say? And the corollary to my question is that I do wonder whether, when the dust has settled from COVID, whether that's 6 months from now, 2 years, whatever it is, whether we're not going to see a phenomenon around the world where people look around at the grassroots level and are just furious at China for what has happened and put pressure on their political leaders to actually decouple the economy. So not just in the U.S. So so look, number one, I guess, do you think that there could be something to that? No offense taken if you don't. Number two, how has COVID played into this thesis?
There's only one person in the world that could ever unite the Republicans and Democrats in the United States, and that person is Xi Jinping. When you saw the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act or the Hong Kong Autonomy Act get passed through Congress and the Senate and fly across the president's desk, what legislation have you seen run through the United States with unanimity, with literal full approval from both sides? Those are the only two pieces of legislation I've seen go that way. So when you look at China's playing its hand, and the manner in which they lied their way through the Wuhan Chinese flu, it is telling to the world. The world knows they lied all the way through. The world knows that the Chinese government and the World Health Organization knew that this was contagious via airborne molecules by December. 7 doctors in the same hospital ended up with this in China in December. They knew it. They knew it right away. And when China banned travel from Wuhan to the rest of China, they continued to let international flights, leave Wuhan for weeks before we shut it down. We think 500,000 Chinese from Wuhan alone landed in the United States in that time frame. China knew what they were doing. The government did this intentionally. Once they fumbled the football in their own end zone, they blew it for the rest of the world.